Greetings, everyone. It is that time of the month, being in Brown at Work Live, and I am beyond excited because I'm sure a lot of you recognize this beautiful woman's face. You've either seen her before on my podcast, but most importantly, you've seen her on LinkedIn, TED Talks, various places. I am so honored that she said yes again, and especially for such a critical conversation that we've been having this month around choosing yourself and establishing psychological safety. You know, we're all hardworking women. Guys, I know you're out there too listening, and we're highly ambitious, but it's extremely critical for us to have a balance. And we're going to continue that conversation tonight. And so I'm going to reintroduce to you to some and introduce to others Deepa Purushothaman. And I was going to do it the way your dad did it again. I'm sorry, Deepa.
That's okay.
Could you pronounce that for
Yeah,
me again?
Deepa Purushothaman. We just chatted
Purushothaman.
about this right before we got
We
on.
did
I messed you up.
just try it. And I said I was going to do every syllable. And she said, yeah, my father does, but I don't. Deepa Purushothaman. And
Yeah.
so let me tell you a little bit about Deepa. Deepa is a former senior executive and trusted advisor on corporate culture and talent. Her seasoned and visionary approach to leadership grants companies and individuals the courage and permission to challenge the status quo of ambition, success, and power. Deepa spent more than 20 years at Deloitte helping clients transform and grow. She was the first Indian American woman and one of the youngest people to make partner in the firm's history. As a senior partner, Deepa was the U.S. managing partner for WIN, Deloitte's renowned women's initiative. Deepa is an author and founder of multiple businesses. In 2022, Deepa's debut book, The First, The Few, The Only, and I'm going to pause there because if you don't have it, you want to order it while we're on live now. Immediately, I have it. It's a phenomenal book. I reference it all the time. Was published by HarperCollins to international acclaim. She recently founded the Rewrite, and it's RE period right for those of you that are taking notes, an unconventional think tank advancing a new story of work. Deepa is also an executive fellow at Harvard Business School. Her passion to advance women extends to her board work. Deepa serves as a board member of Avasara, India's first leadership academy for girls, and the Rutgers University Center for Women in Business. Deepa is a TED and South by Southwest speaker and has been featured in Time, PBS, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Harvard Business Review. Her TED Talks have over 3 million views. She has degrees from Wesley College, Harvard Kennedy School, and the London School of Economics. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and her four fur kids. Deepa, welcome back to Being Brown at
Thank
Work Live.
you. That is a lot to sit through without squirming, but yes, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, absolutely. No, I when I get bios like that, I some people do the short. No, I prefer the long because I want to give people their flowers, right, while they're with us. And when you've done such phenomenal work that you've done and been impactful as you have, we have to share that. We have to share that. So I'm glad, that you were swearing a little bit, but I was going to read every single word. So Deepa, as we talked about when we met last week, and then we, chatted a little bit before we went live tonight. The focus this month has been around setting boundaries for ourselves, really starting to choose ourselves in the workplace, and realizing that it's okay to do that. First of all, right? It's okay to do that. But then how do you do that and still be successful? And I know if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit with the audience, especially those of them that may just be meeting you for the first time, you've had a bit of challenge around doing just that for yourself,
Yeah,
correct? Choosing
absolutely.
boundaries. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Such an important topic is I think for a lot of us, right? Especially if you are, I work with a lot of women of color. If you are the daughter of immigrants, which I am, there is this idea of like, you do more, you sacrifice, right? My parents sacrificed so much. So it's like, you work harder, you do more, you push and you don't complain, you don't stop,
Right.
you just keep going, right? That's how you get ahead. That's how you advance. And I think for a lot of us, that narrative puts aside like the boundaries that we need, how we need to take care of ourselves. And for me, that has always shown up. I've always been the one that went above and beyond. I sometimes say, like,
Mhm.
I learned somewhere a couple of years ago that my superpower at work was not being smarter than everybody else, but it was outworking everybody else, right? And I was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
good at that. And that's how I succeeded. That's how I pushed myself. And I was at Deloitte for over 21 years. In a year, about 16, 17, I started to get really sick. And it
Mm,
started as small things like hives and headaches. And then over the course of a year and a half to 2 years, it turned into all kinds of things, to the point that I spent almost 9 months in bed and I couldn't feel my arms down and my legs down, full neuropathy. I would later find out it was late stage Lyme disease. And I took a number of years to get healthy and work
mm,
on it. And a lot of that has to do with not setting boundaries, right? I lived on the road. I traveled 4 cities a week for a good chunk of my career, lived out of a suitcase, stayed in hotels. And that kind of lifestyle, although exciting and I loved the work, it takes a
sure.
toll, especially when you do it for 2 decades. And I
Yes.
just had never, I never complained about getting sick. I was always I had perfect attendance growing up in school. My parents always talk about that. Like, so I just put aside how I was
Yeah,
feeling, right? And just kind
yeah.
of pushed through, and it caught up with me. And I think that for a lot of us, we don't realize that success has to come with boundaries. Success has to come. I call it like health and wealth now, whereas I think before
Mm,
success was
yes,
just about right getting ahead. And that ambition, in order to be long-term ambitious, in order to be long-term successful, it's not about enduring. It's about thriving. It's about figuring out what you
yes,
need. And I think especially in high performing spaces, not just corporate, but in high performing spaces where we
right.
reward overdoing and always saying yes and being the last one in the chair and the first one in the door, we don't often pay attention to those things. And I think that's a lot of what's showing up for people right now. Leaders are not just burnt out, but leaders are getting sick. And a lot of my research is about how, not just burnout, but the fact that the stress from the workplace can
Yeah.
actually manifest in illness. And we don't talk about that enough.
And we don't talk about it enough. And you're absolutely right, Deepa. I'm from the same background as a Black
Mhm.
woman. My mother was born in the Depression. And so, Depression era. And so I was, that's all I knew was to work hard,
Yeah.
right? Work long hours, work hard, be the first one, last one. And it really, I mean, I have to say that it became so much part of me that I still kind of do it today. I mean, I've changed doctor's appointments to be at meetings or
Yes.
canceled or moved. I've done those things. And then I reflect back and I'm like, wait a minute, what in the world, Linda? And it's just frankly not healthy. And you're right, it's now not just burnout, it's really manifesting, unfortunately, in deeper
Yeah.
negative ways, either emotionally, which for me was the case a couple of years ago where I was really depressed, or it could be physically, which was
Yeah.
your case. And so that's why I believe now that's why we're having more conversations
Yeah.
about this now, because you're right, we've never talked about it and we need to really talk about it. And it's not a bad thing. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what we've got to take the stigmatism away from it, right? We got to take the stigmatism away because we're
Absolutely.
human beings. Wouldn't
Yes.
you
And we
say?
have to keep
Yeah.
talking about it. I mean, I love, Linda, that you said that it's happened to you even recently, right? Or that it continues to happen. I think for a lot of us, we think once we set up the boundaries or once we say no, but it is a continual
Yes.
practice. And especially if you've been rewarded for high performing, or if you've gotten ahead, you've been successful, you know that it works. So for me, it's almost my fallback plan or my
Hmm.
default. And I have to consciously remind myself, no, it's okay to take a break. Like yesterday was a holiday. And I found myself, like making cookies in the kitchen. I was like, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Like, what shouldn't I be doing something else? And I had to remind myself, it's actually a holiday. I don't have anything I need to do. You're allowed to do whatever you feel like
Right.
doing,
Right. Right.
and it's just I think depending on how you were raised and like how
Yes.
you yourself see performing or doing
Yes.
activities,
Yes.
and how we also see our worth. I think it's all tied together. And I was rewarded growing up for doing. And I think it's really been a
Yes.
long process to unwind that and to see when it's happening. So,
No, you're absolutely correct. I often tell my audience knows this. I often say who we are personally is who we are professionally. And if
mm,
we are raised that way, I know I was, and to
yeah,
the point of perfect attendance or getting all the stars. I read
yes,
Linda's name has all the stars. I
yeah,
read, more books than it, or whatever it was, right? I mean, that was constant how I grew up and the expectation, frankly, and so it did shape who I became as an adult. And it was a performing environment that I was in manufacturing, and you get rewarded for that. So you're absolutely correct. But for me, it's been the point, and I think the pendulum now, to be honest, is swinging the other way, where the generations are saying,
yeah,
I'm just not here for it.
yeah,
I'm really, the Gen Z's, I'm taking the time I need. And I don't
yeah,
understand. I mean, my daughter, I was on vacation with her. She was 18, if you're in New Orleans. And I swear, I'll share this quick story, and then I want to ask you a few questions. It was Good Friday, or was it good? I can't remember. It was anyway. It was Easter weekend. We were in New Orleans, and I had, I think, almost every hour for the first 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours, I had a call with
Oh,
him. And she stopped me one time because we were actually sitting outside at a restaurant. I have my headphones in. I'm on a call, and at the end of that call, she was like, "Mom, are you on vacation or
yeah.
are you not?
Yeah.
You've not really been present the last 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
You've been walking around. It's beautiful here." She says, "I don't understand why you just can't be on vacation."
Yeah.
Right? And she'll be 30 in August, and she does not. I mean, they
Yeah.
can't wrap their head around that,
Yeah.
and that's kind of in a good way,
Yeah.
right? It's in a good way. I mean, she shows up, she does what she's supposed to do, but she does choose herself when she needs to do that. And so
Yeah.
that's why this conversation, Deepa, is so critically important. And I know based on your personal experiences and as you shared, your research has told you, some additional things. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about, the research you've done? I
Yeah.
mean, that fabulous book that I'm
Yeah.
so blessed to have on my bookshelf and I've read, international acclaim. What did you learn as you talked to women around the world about similar experiences?
Yeah, when I was doing the book, I interviewed over 500 senior women of color in particular. And what I found is 3 and 4 women were really, depending on what cut and what lens, let's
Sure.
just say in general, 3 and 4 women were actually manifesting physical manifestations of being sick, right, from the stress. So whether that was the headaches or the heart palpitations, whether that was
Yeah.
the hair falling out or fertility issues, there's a set of issues and ways that this shows up. But I think, since the book, and I continue to do a lot of research, especially on
Sure.
women, the example you gave is one I just was talking about a month ago with a group of women where they were saying, I have something called vacation phobia, where it takes they literally, and these are senior women, where they literally bake in 2 to 3 days on the front end of their vacation, knowing that's going to take them 2 or 3 days to unplug and put the phone down. And when someone said that in this group of 15 women, they all said yes, we all do it too. And so it's this phenomenon where I think we have
Yeah.
been conditioned to do that, right? And part of it is the research shows we've been rewarded for overperforming. We believe we have to do it. We believe we have to be perfect. We have to be seen. We have
Yes.
to overdo, right, to be
Yes.
recognized in the same sorts of ways and to get the same sorts of opportunities. And we don't realize the cost of doing that. And so that's really a lot of the work that I study. What is the system set up, or the structure
Yes.
that insists that folks like you and I do that? But also what happens when people like your daughter don't do that? Because by the way, your daughter can say no and set those boundaries. One, it's hard, but two, the people around you supervising her may not see it the same way. And so if the structure, if the work culture, if the rules of work don't match what
Mm.
this next generation is insisting on, that's where we see a lot of the dissonance. And you see a lot of really senior leaders saying, well, they just have to suck it up. And that's not really where we are. And so I think the norms haven't really caught up to the
Right.
conversation that's happening, and also the data that exists that shows the way that we have been working for generations isn't working for us and
It's
isn't.
not working. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think, Deepa, and I mean, I know it was a pandemic that took place, but
Yeah.
but do you think, I would have thought we would have learned something
Yeah.
from that pandemic? You know what I mean? But we seem to not have. It was 2 years where we didn't go into the office, where, I could, I mean, I worked, true, I had the laptop or whatever, but I also had time for a cup of coffee, or you know what I mean? It was,
Yeah.
I will say, after a period of time, I found myself working longer
Yeah.
hours,
Yes.
bored.
And many people did. Yeah.
Yeah, I got more done. But there seemed to be something different about it, right? It wasn't the stressful drive in. It wasn't and I know for some of us, it wasn't the performative because I wasn't in the office, right? Because there's some things, to your point, expectations around that as well. So we have certain expectations from generational differences, but then we have those other dynamics as well. I would have thought we would have learned something, but we didn't, because we're still having this conversation,
Oh,
right?
I feel like when we talked a couple of years ago, if you had asked me that question, I felt like there was such possibility of what we would learn
Yes.
from COVID, right? And there was this window of 2 to 3 years where it felt like things had, I call it a pendulum, they'd moved, but they hadn't come all the way back. And I think we have found ourselves in a situation where they've not only come back, but they've swung further
Yes.
the other way. So yes, I don't think it's not that we didn't learn anything. I think we are consciously choosing to ignore what we learned
Mm,
because it
good
serves some group
point.
of us, and we're just going to go with that. And
Good
for the rest of
point.
us, it's, what do you do? And that's why I think we're seeing a lot of women in particular
Yeah.
leaving the workforce, right? Yes, we have
Yeah.
a set of women who've been pushed out of the workforce, especially
Right.
Black women. That's what the data
Right.
suggests. But there's
Right.
another set of women who, because the structure doesn't work, because childcare doesn't work, because of just the pressures that come with getting senior, and that pressure to
Yeah.
conform and perform doesn't work. They're also opting out and building their own businesses and trying to do it
Right.
differently. And I'm fingers crossed that they're going to show us that yes, the lessons from COVID aren't wasted. But yeah, in corporate spaces, I think a lot of those gains have been erased, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and it's sad, and I'm glad you made that point because I do agree with you. There's a choice,
Yeah.
because we did learn, but then there was a very distinct choice,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're right, and that's why also not just those of us that have been pushed out, but there's a rising, growing number of women who are selectively removing themselves from that environment. That's the boundaries they're creating for themselves, right?
Yep.
They're saying, I no longer choose this and I
Correct.
can still be successful. And I'm going to create the environment to do so. If you kind of flip the script a little bit, Deepa, you've talked to a lot of women on this side of the spectrum. Can you share your perspectives? Because we've got leaders, listening in, and that you're going to get tagged a lot. There's going to be comments and things come out of this. We're going to post. What would you say to leaders that have the opportunity, to create systems or to shift cultures from what you've studied, the research you've done, conversations you've had, and even your own experience? What would you offer to those that have the power to drive change? What would you
Yeah,
offer to them?
I mean, I want to say one, it can be hard. It doesn't have to be hard, but it can be hard because the
Hmm.
norms are really more the other way. But the way
Sure.
that we work is really built on this two parental household. It was built, decades ago. It
Yeah.
was based on this idea that one person went out to work. Typically, in this model, it was the man, and the wife
Yeah.
stayed home and raised the children. And when he was out of the house from 9 to 5, which is why we call it 9 to 5,
Nine to
right?
five.
Under
Yeah.
air quotes, he didn't necessarily call home. Like all the home responsibilities were done by the person at home.
True.
And so there was
Yes.
this true division of labor. And that's not the way that work works now. And so we've never updated it. So for those of us that are trying to do it differently, I want to say one, that structure is based on a very antiquated way of working, a way of being that has not been
Yes.
updated. For the rest of us, we have to figure out how we do it differently, but it's okay to try things and then pull them back. And I think a lot of this is also about what works for you. And so I think one of the
Yeah.
things that we're realizing, and the more and more leaders I talk to, is what works for me is not going to work for you, Lyndon. It's not going to work
True.
for my
True.
husband and for other people. Like we have to figure out
Yeah.
what works for us and make that work for our lives. But part of the work is also understanding what do you need and what do you want. And so when I work with
Mm.
leaders, what I actually have them sit down and do is like start to think about whose work life you really admire, like who's doing the work that you really want to do, but not just the work, like who is actually working in ways that you really admire. Like, is there a
Yes.
leader in your office that is really good at setting boundaries or is good at, leaving at 5 or 6 o'clock and then getting back online later in the day, maybe after they have done, some of the childcare
Right.
activities that, happen from 5 to 7 o'clock or 5 to 8 o'clock, even before
Yes. Yes.
kids. Like those kinds of, and to model their behavior, to recognize it, to look after it, and to kind of figure out how do you do that in your own life. So one is we need more models. We need to like realize that there are people that are doing it differently, but we're not upholding them enough. We're not like showcasing them enough. The second thing is to sit down and really figure out, what do you want your life to look like? What are
Yes.
your boundaries? What is important to you? I do an exercise where I say to a lot of leaders, how do you want to show up at work? How do you want to be known? What is really important to you in how you define yourself? And once you know those things, and by the way, it's not like most people think it's going to be 50, 70, 100 things. For a lot of leaders I work with, it comes down to 6 to 12 things max. I've never seen a list more than 15 ever when you really ask them. And it's really a lot about identity, like what's important to them. What are the
Mm.
limitations or the constraints that they're working around? And once you know those, I tell leaders not to give on those things at work. So for
Yeah.
example, if you coach someone, your kid's, soccer team, and that's really an important identity for you, that's like a non-negotiable, that is just sacred time. Tell people at work, don't hide that. And they will probably
Yes.
work with you to make sure that that happens and that you'll make up the time or you'll figure out extra time, do other things, other places.
Yes.
If
Absolutely.
you manage a chronic illness and that is really something that you cannot, high. Like for me, travel is really hard. So I need to really think about travel differently now. I share that when I do speaking, or I share that when like I need to come in a day early, or I need to,
Right.
I'm not going to stay for the evening activities. Like I need to go back to my room and rest. Like people are really respectful, but if you don't share that and then they kind of eke into that time and then you feel resentful. So it's a little bit of like, yes, the structure needs to change, but some of it are things that we can do, but we have to be clear on what we need and what we want. And then we have to let people know. If they don't respect that, that's on them. But if we don't tell them, that's a little bit on us. And that's the difference. And that's really what I try and teach and talk about a lot.
And it's so important. I've had some of my clients say, "Well, Linda, I don't want everybody in my business." I'm like, it's not, I think you've got it. That's a mindset change you have to make, because you're absolutely right, Deepa. How are they going to know if you don't tell them?
Yes.
Right. And I know on my team that I have certain individuals that their calendar is actually blocked, and it's the time when they get home and they have a window of which they do certain things with their kids. They either are the ones that are transporting them to something, or they're doing, or it's even for themselves.
Yeah.
Where they're actually at the gym, and they take that hour or that hour and a half, and then they're back online.
Yeah.
3 hours later, they're back online, and even a little bit later in their day, but it works for them because they've had that 3 hour window of either taking care of themselves or did whatever they felt was important to them. To your point, because they've defined that's important to them, and they've drawn that line. And I know from my team members, I have respected it highly. Now, it's not always respected, and some leaders can't wrap their head around it, and they expect you to do whatever you need to do to be available, whatever hour you need to be available. But you're right, then that's on them. And what you say, Deepa, then that's a decision, for instance, Linda would have to make as to whether or not that's a culture or an environment that I want to be in.
Exactly. And I have found that to be rarely the case, by the way. Yes, there are some people that have very hard and staunch rules, but they're the rarity. They're not the norm. And I think it's once you know that, once you understand that, once you set your boundaries, once you're clear. And by the way, once you do it, other people will do it too. And that becomes the new norm of the team. Like, so a lot of the behavior shifts happen not by an individual, but they happen in groups, and they happen in teams, and that's how it doesn't come top down. It comes from the bottom up behavior shifts.
It does. It's like throwing that pebble in the water. I used to tell my team, hey, we can start this change. We can have that ripple effect. It's a small circle that ends up growing, and next thing you know, other teams are looking at us. So I totally, absolutely agree with you. And it is few and far between when you have that staunch person that just is, wants to be difficult or uncooperative or what, for whatever reason. Very rare. And there's so much value in us understanding that we need to share this information. But I love what you said at first. We have to be internally very clear. You can't be all over the place, right? I mean, I think you have to really know who you are. I call it really part of your brand, right? I mean, there's certain lines I have that's part of who Linda Talafero is. And I'm sure that's who you are as well when you show up in spaces. So I absolutely love that when you shared that first, getting that clarity and then sharing it with not only your team members, but your leaders and other places, and then walking in it. And walking in it. So,
and knowing what it becomes a filter is kind of sometimes what I tell people. Like once you know what your line is, once you know what your behavior is, once you know what your expectations are, that becomes a filter on, is this someone I want to be around? Is this a place I want to be? Is this an opportunity I want to say yes to? Is this someone I want to give my time to? But if you don't know, then you don't have a filter, and then you end up running around saying yes to everything and then feeling overdone all the time, right? So.
And I have been that person in my lifetime, whether it's the personal side or professional side, where for some reason I didn't understand that no was a complete sentence. Because I had not made that, I hadn't defined myself. So I'm so glad you said that. There's so much value in really knowing what your non-negotiables are, and that it's okay to have them. It's absolutely okay to have them.
Not only is it okay to have them, by the way, I just want to say, I also think sometimes it strengthens your power and position, and it actually makes people respect you more.
And I was just getting ready to lean into that and ask you, did you think it was, courageous to do? Did you think and you said it, go right ahead, finish that.
No, I don't necessarily think it's courageous. I think it's how you do it matters more than doing it. I think
good point.
Knowing what's important, knowing why. I think sometimes people are people, right? So if you can explain, this is why I need this, and here's what it shows up like, if that doesn't put you out, if that doesn't feel like too much information sharing, that actually engenders people to really want to help you, is what I find. And so, yes. And in fact, the more you set boundaries, the more you say no, the more you say, I can do that, but but I need to trade this, right? So
Mhm.
everything can become a negotiation. I
Yeah.
need to think about that before I say yes to it, because I'm someone who goes all in and I want to make sure I have space and time to do that. People are like being like, wow, that's really impressive for someone to say that. Even if you're brand
Yes.
new to the workforce, right? You're not saying, no, I don't want to do it. You're saying, I want to do it well. So I just think we underestimate
Oh, I love it.
how we say no. We underestimate how we set boundaries. We underestimate how much, like, too much sharing is a bad thing. And it's not always, as long as it's done in the right ways, with the
Yes.
right intent.
I love that. Love that because
Mhm.
it does engender people to you, and in doing so, they get to know you,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it establishes a little bit more of a connection as well. At least that's what I found. Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that. So we're about to wrap up here. So the time just
The time just flew
flies.
by.
It just flies by. What I want to say real quick before but I get to the last part where I want to give you the final comments for the audience. Anyone, look, first of all, definitely go out and buy Deepa's book. But most importantly, if you're a leader out there, or you have a team, or you're a group of leaders, you're a leader of a group of leaders, consider reaching out to Deepa. You can find her on LinkedIn. She has a website. There's so much knowledge and expertise that she has herself. But as you've heard, she's done so much very quantitative and qualitative research that is just invaluable. And if you really want to be that leader or establish a strong team of leaders, I highly recommend you connect with Deepa and let her come in, have a conversation, let her come in, whatever it is you need from her, reach out and connect. You will not, I'm telling you, it'll be the best decision you've made as a leader yourself. And so, with that, Deepa, I'd like to give you the final words. You mentioned a couple things that you just, gave the audiences what they can consider doing them for themselves if the system isn't working for them. What would you leave with them as a few
Yeah.
very key tools, methodologies, or even ways to shape their mind around setting boundaries as we close
Yeah,
this
maybe
session?
I'll just, given, we're almost at time, I'll just share one thought, just given the climate that we're in. I think for a lot of people, they believe in a difficult economy, in a difficult job market, there is no
Mm,
space or room for boundaries. And so they just have to say yes to everything. They can't be choiceful, right? They just have to say yes to everything because the next
yeah.
opportunity might not come by. And I have just worked
Mm,
with thousands of leaders over the last few years. And I think the ones that are highly successful, the ones that really truly get ahead, are the ones that don't believe that don't accept that just because it's a bad economy or it's a bad time or it's a difficult job market, they have to settle. You can make compromises, but there's a difference between compromising and settling. And so my guidance to everybody who's kind of listening to us talk and say, yeah, that's nice, but they're out of touch with the difficult job market is no. I actually think now is the time to be clearer what your limits are, because there's so much happening in our world that can, cause the
yes.
stress and cause the other boundary erosion, that it's really
So
important to know
true.
what's important at work. And to
So
do the
true.
work, right? Doing the work matters. Like, I'm not saying you can, avoid
Right.
these things, but it's not the time to let go of the things that are important to you and your boundaries. And I just think that's such an important message I'm not hearing enough right now.
And no, and I'm so glad you said that because there would be fear around, doing some people
Yeah.
listening to us and doing what we're talking about, right? Because they're saying, look, as people are losing their jobs left
Yeah.
and right, I don't want to be the next one tapped on the shoulder. So there's no way. What is Deepa in the boundaries? There's no way. I got to say yes. So I'm so glad you said that, Deepa, because it is a critical point that needs to be made today because we can still choose ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes, we realize that you and I, it's not oblivious to us, right? We realize it, but we still can choose ourselves.
Yes.
Still can choose ourselves in the process.
And be successful. Yes.
And be
Yes.
successful. Yes, in choosing yourself. Deepa, this was fantastic. Of course, I knew it was going to be. And again, I'm so honored that you joined me at Dan Brown at Work Live for the second time. What a blessing. Hey, everyone, seriously, connect with her on LinkedIn, reach out to her. Uh, Invaluable. I know you've learned a lot. I'm sure, send some comments to her questions. She'd be more than glad to give you even more context and color to this topic. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. If you're catching it on the replay or if you're live, I cherish you all. I really am honored to serve you all. Until next time.